That was not Hugo. That was me. Can you guys hear me? This is just
Ah,
Yeah.
yes. All right.
Okay.
And we're live now.
So,
All
yeah.
at once. Here we go.
Okay. Sorry, my camera won't be working. This is 11:30 in the night, and not camera-friendly situation at my home. Be working. This is 11:30 in the night, and not camera-friendly situation at my home right now. So, my bad.
Fair enough. All right.
Yeah.
So everybody's saying they see Ben and April. They hear everybody. So we're good to go. Do you guys want to start with just a quick introduction of who all of us are? I'm sure most people have been on sessions, maybe gotten a little introduction there, but if somebody hasn't, we can give a quick introduction. You want to start, April?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is April Dunham. I'm a partner technical architect at Microsoft. Before joining Microsoft, I was a MVP in Powerapps and Power Automate. So really active in the community there, spoken at many of these Collab 365 events and conferences everywhere. So happy to be here.
All right. Sounds good. And Jajit, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasjeet Chopra. I live in Mohali, India, as of now, and it's been almost 9 years I've moved here. I was working in US also for quite some time. I started my journey as a Sharepoint consultant, and now I'm an Azure MVP, and I'm running a small company called Bantara Technologies based out of Mohali.
All right, sounds good. And you're joining us at 11:30 at night. You might get the award for being at the most non-conducive hour to join something like this live.
So the situation here is I work New York hours literally because most of my customers are based out of that Eastern time zone. So my usual work hours are I sleep at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the night.
Got it. Wow. I don't know that I could do that. So, and I'm Ben Stechink. I'm actually here on the Eastern time zone as well. I'm down in Jacksonville, Florida. And
Okay.
I have my own company, IntelliJink, and like you, I've been doing SharePoint for a long time. I lose track, but I started with somewhere working with SharePoint 2003, and have kind of moved into just the Microsoft 365 Power Platform stack as a whole.
Nice.
So, yeah, with that, and sorry for people watching video if my eyes start going crazy. I have a monitor over here that has all the questions on it, and my camera's over here. So bear with me as I go back and forth between the two. So should we dive into questions? And April and Jasjeet, I think this is the first time you've been on here. We also have to keep track of our favorite question to give a prize away at the end.
Got it.
Okay.
So we'll keep an eye on those and come up with a good one at the end. So those of you watching, try to think of a good question. So let's go up. I got to go up to all my questions here. So the first one was from Sue, and she asked, how do you send one or more PDF documents from a SharePoint library to email attachments and then send to designated entities all via Power Automate? I'm thinking this is picking up a file attachment from the library and sending it as an attachment just to certain people. Do either of you want to try to tackle that one and kind of describe it at a high level?
Where are you reading that question from?
If you have an idea. So it's in all of those, Jasjeet, are in Teams meeting. So if you go look in there, that's where Sue asked that one. I don't know. Do you want to try to tackle that one, April? You want me to try to tackle it?
I mean, it's a little bit, right, one of those things tricky to explain, right, without
Right.
just like talking about it. I mean, essentially, you can create a flow that you'll call from Powerapps, right? You can then, I like using, there's a JSON function. So depending on, it really depends on how you're passing it. Are you like uploading it? Or are you using the attachment control? If you're using attachments, you could loop through, pass that to Power Automate. Power Automate can read it. You probably have to do like a data to URI, depending on the file format. There's lots of complexities to it for sure. But then Power Automate can read that and send the email. And I'm sure several of us probably have videos or know of YouTube videos that walk that through that exact scenario that we could probably paste in the chat or something as a reference. But if you want to try to, that's a high level of how it would work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, when I always try to question these things in terms of why send the attachment in the first place. So if you can send a link, that will be much better in terms of taking the person to the source of the truth where the document lies. So if you can change it that way, that would work. And I don't know, again, where your candidates are to whom you're trying to send that email to. So yeah, if you want that dynamic, it's a different way to implement it. But if you want them static, then it's fairly simple and straightforward in Flow as well. So yeah, it depends on the use case, like what April's at.
Right, because in Power Automate, if I remember right, there's an action now for sharing a file in Power Automate, isn't there? Do either of you remember?
Yeah, you can get a share link.
Yes.
In Power Automate, yep.
So yeah, that would be one way to do it. Kind of like you said, just send that share link, or I think adding it as a file attachment is a little harder because, like you said, April, I think you need to go get like the file contents and do some things there. It's not quite as simple as just saying attach this file.
Right.
So this was another interesting one from Sue, was they are heavily invested in on-prem solutions, lists, calendar lists, issue lists, those type of lists, document libraries, info path forms, and then the form library in SharePoint, and then SharePoint Designer workflows. They are moving towards SharePoint Online, and they want to know what are the comparative solutions or options in SharePoint Online and the Power Platform for each of the above. So lists, document libraries, info path forms, the form library, and workflows. I mean, lists and document libraries, those are there in SharePoint Online. So
exactly, yeah.
Those haven't changed at all from on-prem. The UI has changed, but the underlying functionality is going to essentially be the same for those two. How about info path forms?
Well, obviously, info path forms, I guess I'll jump in, would be Powerapps would be your replacement. So, just like you would click customize an info path on your SharePoint list or libraries, we have that same functionality with Powerapps to handle that, as well as the additional functionality of being able to create like what we call a standalone Powerapp, kind of like how you would do like an info path form and a form library approach. So you can handle both those scenarios, whether you're customizing a list or library like you would with info path with Powerapps, or creating a new standalone app in Powerapps.
Yep. And I think one thing that I tend to miss there, April, too, is when you go create a new Power App, by default, you're given the new phone or tablet. And in my head, it always triggers that I'm supposed to create a phone or a tablet app. But if you go in and create that app and go in and set the custom resolution, you can go change the size of that, set the pixels of it. So it very much looks like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, or a resolution that kind of replicates that info path form. The biggest challenge I've always faced with that is that there really isn't there's no sense of a migration, or let's take this info path and convert it to Powerapps very easily. Usually it's just go rebuild it in Powerapps.
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, there's no magic tool that will convert those for us. Yeah.
What was the next one there? Form library.
Yeah, there's not really a form library because, you would be creating these in Powerapps, and that's stored right in the Powerapps portal. So there's really not a concept of form libraries itself, because with Powerapps, you have your data layer. So that could be like a SharePoint list that the data itself is stored in, but the physical Power App is stored in the Power App portal. So you don't really need a form library itself.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a workaround I've used to this, because I think I'm going to assume this is where you're going with that, Sue, is one of the advantages of InfoPath was you could obviously open up the form and see all of the data in place in the form, versus, like you said, April, with Powerapps, it's just a list and you can't always open it in that form and get the form view of it. What I have done is I've added a URL field, and it is possible, and I can't remember where the video is. I think this was one maybe Shane Young did, where you can create a Powerapps that if you pass in the right query parameters, you can actually open up a Powerapp as a list item, or if you're just customizing the list itself, customizing your new and edit forms, you have that option as well. So there are a few different ways you can kind of open that data in place in the Power App.
So yeah, I do that a lot for my customers as of now. It's called deep linking. And as I would patch my items back into the SharePoint list, I'll have a form link column there that will have these parameters for that ID specifically. So next time if they click on that, it'll actually directly take them to the form. Ben.
Yeah, and I do that too, and I have videos on that. I use SharePoint
Awesome.
list formatting to have a hyperlink that can go and open like the associated Powerapp item.
Nice.
Yeah, so if one of you guys, I don't know if someone has a link handy, or we can always post it in this chat too once we're done with the live AMA and give you guys some videos on that deep linking. And then the last one was workflows and the Power Platform, and I think that's going to be your Power Automate.
Yeah.
So similar situation there, I guess. You don't have a magic tool to convert as well there, so you do have to literally recreate those flows looking at the designer steps pretty much.
Yep. And the other thing to look about too is you do have logic apps in Azure. There's some pros and cons of logic apps versus Flow or Power Automate. You can move some between, but those are kind of going to be those two alternatives.
Correct.
Next question. I don't have a name with this question. So what would each of us give as a Powerapp top tip or top feature for someone who is just getting started building their own Powerapps or getting started with Power Automate? So do you have a favorite feature?
I usually tell them to start with the templates that Microsoft has built. Those are amazing places to start learning, honestly. So, and for Power Automate, I think the Microsoft Learn platform is pretty good to get those initial, steps to know what Power Automate is and how to work with them.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I mean, the templates are definitely a great place when you're just getting started to learn, because you can kind of dissect and reverse engineer, what they're doing and learn that way. And I know I learned well that way as well. The other thing I'll point out for both Powerapps and Power Automate are the both the app checker and the flow checkers. So if you're running into any issues, I find that those really help you identify and give you kind of rich error handling within both tools to help you overcome any hurdles there. And then of course the Power Users community. There's blogs out there that'll help you figure out, if you're trying to figure out what functions are available, what expressions are available in Power Automate and vice versa. Those are really helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely. So my top tip for Power Automate is buy a really, really big monitor. Yeah. You guys have some great resources. That's always my struggle, is I end up building these crazy Power Automate flows, and my monitor is just never big enough to see everything I want on it.
Yeah,
that's true. Struggle is real. Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of blogs, YouTube, like you guys said. I think you guys covered that one. Both of you covered that pretty well. This is an interesting. What is the most common start to the flows you build in Powerapp? My answer was putting a trigger in it. I don't think that's what they were really asking. But do you guys have a common one you use a lot, or you tend to use within? I mean, you have all the instant ones, the scheduled ones, the automatic.
I think the most I use is the email one, because majority of the customers, they don't like, even with Powerapps, they don't like their from email address. So for email solution, and there's a future question about the impersonation. So that's how I handle them specifically. If I want a flow to work in a specific capacity, especially from Powerapps, I would create another list where I would push the data for use and have the flow run it so it impersonate that user instead of the Powerapps taking that user in place. So the most flow I use is for sending customized emails at this point.
That's cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say probably I do a lot of obviously Powerapp stuff, and then specifically SharePoint-based Powerapp. So it'd be a tie between triggering it from Powerapps or triggering it from like when a SharePoint list, when an item's added. Yeah,
I'm with you, April. I do a lot of SharePoint, so mine tends to be list items added, updated are the most common flows that I trigger, or the most
And
common
I think
trigger I use.
I don't remember if it's still on the roadmap or already there. I think earlier it was combined, those triggers, item created and updated. I think they're separating the updated one at this point. I don't know if it's already live or what the timeline is for that. But
I believe it's in the preview. Yeah, now.
It is.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to that one.
Yes, that one, because I'm sure all of us have experienced those infinite loops and trying to avoid those with the new and updated combined into a single trigger. All right, here's another interesting one. Angie asked, when using a try catch finally with Power Automate, what do you put in the finally block? All I can find on that answer is whatever actions you want to happen, regardless if the try fails or not. And Angie is looking for an example because she can't think of any reason to have it. If my flow fails at any point, I will have an email notification in the catch, but then what? So do you guys use the try catch finally, and what do you put in your finally?
Well, I don't know. For me, like, I guess it really depends on what you're building in the use case, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to say in general terms what you would use that for, but maybe it's just some like wrap up functions of it. So maybe you need to, like maybe that's where you would send an email like, hey, this process is done. Like finally, after everything's completed, it might be a use case for it, kind of like a notification thing, or maybe you're updating like a backend list to have like more thorough logging about what's happening in the workflow. It's a common use case I use for the finally too, is to maybe log to an audit list.
Yep. So in my case, it depends on the budget from the customer, what they really can afford, to be honest. And that decides whether I'm logging, like April said, logging in detail what's happening and what failed in a SharePoint list somewhere, or building a logic to be very resilient in terms of where it kicks on a backup flow, which will make sure why it failed. And maybe if there's a logic to be fixed, maybe we can dynamically fix it. If not, yes, otherwise an email goes out, which creates either a ticket in the ticketing system or alerts an administrator to go and fix it and creates a task for them to complete it. So it's more automated and there's accountability for who's supposed to take action on it.
Yeah, and I've used it some to track if a flow is running. So going back to the whole looping thing with the new and edit, if I have a flow that's running and it starts on a new and then it's going to make some edits, a lot of times at the very beginning, I'll set a flag, a field on that list item to say there's a flow running in the background. And then no matter what happens, if the try succeeds, if the catch succeeds, or if the catch is triggered, finally at the end of it, I want it to toggle that flag off to indicate that that flow is no longer running.
Right. You can also set the concurrency of that to make sure only one flow runs at a time in those situations. So I find that a little bit more handy as well. So many things you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of like you said, at the end of the day, what you put in finally kind of depends on that use case. There may be some cases where there really is no need for that finally. You just have a try catch.
Correct.
But yeah, like you said, a lot of it tends to be the cleanup. Any cleanup you want to do, regardless of if it fails or succeeds. What feature or change are you most excited about in Power Platform 2020 Wave 2 release? If you guys remember what's on it, I had to go look up what was even on it.
Yeah, I had to refresh my memory, but the one thing that stood out for me was, since I do a lot of Powerapp stuff, is right now if you're wanting to integrate flows in Poweraps, can be really a pain if you need to change that flow and you have to remove it and re-add it a lot of times. So one of the things on the Wave 2 was the richer integration with flow and Power Automate, so that you don't have to like remove and re-add anytime you make changes. So a better experience there. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I don't remember any on top of my head though.
That one would be a very welcome change. One of the other ones that's on there is some of the new AI scenarios. And I don't know a lot of people using AI yet, partly because budget tends to come in, but
yeah,
I have been able to play with some of the AI stuff and some trial tenants, and as I've created some training for Power Platform and just seeing them continue to kind of introduce some of those new AI scenarios and AI models in there is going to be fun to see in there as well. Next question. What is the best way to move data out of Excel? So sounds like new data added to Excel, tables, sheets, and into Power Automate on a daily basis.
Seems like a great use case for a scheduled flow, and I think it would
Yep.
depend on where the Excel is stored. If it's in like, your OneDrive or something, or then that could easily automate and get the data with the scheduled flow from that. If it's something that's just on your desktop, though, that also seems like it might be a good use case for a UI flow as well to automate that. So it really depends on where I guess the Excel is going to be stored.
Yeah, if you do a scheduled flow, I don't know the answer to this one. I don't know if either of you do. If you're going to do a scheduled flow in Excel and you're adding just rows to an Excel workbook, on a scheduled flow, can you pick up just the additions to that? Or would you need something else in there to kind of determine what's been added to your Excel workbook?
You have to get some logic. Like you'd have to compare, like, I guess I'm assuming you're writing it out to some other database, right? From Excel. So you'd have to have some kind of ID or something in the flow that you trigger on and to match up on to get get items starting from this ID onward in your formulas or in your actions and flow to do that.
Yeah, I've kept track of some of that stuff before too in like a SharePoint list. Use the SharePoint list to keep the most recently grabbed row from Excel so you know where to start with. That would be the trickiest part for me, is if it's like a continually growing Excel workbook, is making sure you only grab new stuff.
Yep.
Jamie has a fun one.
Okay.
If you were put in charge of the Power Platform for a day, what's one thing you would change about it?
I would want them to give us the ability to change the connector names, please. That has caused a lot of a lot of hours working in and making sure things work correctly. If somebody drops a connection and tries to add it again, or the recent change with Office 365 users and Microsoft 365 users, it did cause a lot of pain for my projects that I've been working on. Some of the devs try to, just remove and add it, and boom, all of gone.
Everything breaks.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, that would be the number one thing for me.
I feel like I can get in trouble with that question. So I'll just play the safe answer, and I'll just say maybe a native graph connector, so we can call the Office graph easily. That'd be powerful. Be awesome too. Yeah. That
would be a good one. I don't know if you could actually implement this in a day. I would love to see somehow be able to create Powerapps that are a little bit more responsive in terms of the UI, so that you could build one for a phone and have it work in a tablet landscape or on a monitor a little bit better. I've done some stuff where I try to like embed them in a SharePoint site, and the whole scaling with different resolutions.
But doesn't that problem get resolved if you create a Microsoft Teams Powerapp within the Teams? If you create it, it does give you some responsiveness out of the box without you having to do anything too much.
It will eventually.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Not currently, but that is something that's been on the roadmap for a while. Is not just even within the context of Teams, but being able to have more native responsive Powerapps applications. So I know that didn't make it in this latest wave 2, but that is something that should eventually be coming to us to build the more responsive, because I think they're gonna have like maybe responsive, templates that we can utilize, and that's one of the things that's gonna be part of the new Teams Power Platform offering, is responsiveness out of the box.
All right, I'm looking forward to that one. Next question from Rob. What is... we lost Jajit. It's you and I, April. Okay. Got to hold down the fort. Hopefully he'll be back here in a minute. From Rob, he'd be interested on our take when the logic of a Powerapp becomes too complex, and you should consider something like a webhook.
Huh. Yeah.
I'm trying to think how I'd take logic in a Powerapp and convert it to a webhook.
Yeah, I was trying. I mean, I could see how you could offload to like, well, I guess an Azure function that you would call to do something really complex. I've did that before. Just something that you can do natively. But a webhook specifically, I'm not sure of a great use case for that, and how that would work.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. The only thing I've ever offloaded out of has been Power Automate. I've offloaded some stuff out of Power Automate before to Azure Functions or to Azure Automation with PowerShell scripts.
I mean, and I
And
can see that
usually,
there are.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I could see there would be like a use case too for like you may need a PCF control if there's something really custom from like a control perspective that you're needing, and that you would do that. But just
Yeah, I've never run into that before.
Sorry, guys, my internet connection broke. I just got back.
No, that's fine. So we were just answering. We'll see if you have answer for this. Do you have a take on when the logic of a Power App becomes too complex and you should consider something like a webhook?
Webhook specifically. So far, no. I haven't. No, I haven't had a scenario where I've done that at this point. But in terms of complexity, I do try to do as much pre-planning as possible and try to tell my customer about the lifecycle management of, are you planning this Power App for 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10-year period, so you're aware of how it will evolve and what complexity will be done. So does it even make sense to implement it here or develop some other custom solution and go another route?
Yeah, I suppose that would be something I've done before. I have gone away from Power Apps and used like SPFX before to create certain forms because of either a functional limitation or, again, that responsive scenario where it just made it a little bit easier to use SPFX instead for an embedded form in SharePoint.
Got it.
yeah.
Another question from Jamie is, sorry, I was looking at some other questions. What's one thing you wish you knew about the Power Platform? So Power Apps, anything in it, Power Apps, Power Automate, or Power BI when you first started using it? I have one that
Powerapps, the journey for me. Okay.
Nope, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying that for me, Powerapps has been a very different journey in terms of whatever I had to do in Powerapps, I had to look at the documentation because this is nothing like any other platform. So, and pretty much similar thing in Power Automate. The thing I love over there is you have APIs and hooks that you can go and do pretty much anything and everything you want for SharePoint stuff. But yeah, nothing too specific for that answer.
Yeah, I can't put my finger on one thing I wish I knew because, like you said, it's so flexible. There's usually always something that I don't know when I go build a new Power App and I have to figure it out. The one thing that caught me off guard, and it really isn't applicable to this anymore, is I wish I knew that all my Azure connectors were going to switch over to premium connectors at some point in time in the future. Sorry, April.
That's a burning one.
There's a little bit of a hot button there sometimes, but no, in terms of just overall functionality, I don't have anything. Jova, anything, April?
I mean, I started on using them when they were like first out. So I guess, there wasn't as much documentation as there is today. So maybe one of the things is just like the impacts of like how I was initially doing things as I was learning on the performance of my apps, and then realizing if there would have been like more documentation, and I just knew more early on that, oh, like doing a filter rather than a lookup might not be the best thing for performance, or I'm not caching, things like that,
Yeah, that would probably be a good one, is how Powerapps works with large lists, especially if you're going to have SharePoint as your data sources, and making sure you really understand that well. Jim, What are guidelines for when to use a SharePoint list versus a Microsoft list versus Dataflex, aka Project Oak? Is it Oakland? Oak, whatever the new project name is for it. Dataflex versus Dataflex Pro. I'm mainly thinking from the perspective of building a system from scratch. So I'm creating the data source as well as the app and any associated flows. When do you use which data sources?
Well, first, I don't know if I'll just jump in. SharePoint list, Microsoft list are they're the same thing. So there's that one decision point taken out of there. So list versus Dataflex, taking that specifically, to me, the decision point is going to be where do you need to host the application? That's going to be one. If it's in Teams and you want Teams to be the only and primary place that you access this app, then Dataflex would be a good placeholder for that. And because you get the added benefits too of easy deployment Teams, responsiveness for the app. And then you can use that Dataflex as data source. Where Pro would come in would be if you need to do more things, like you get a little bit more of the CDS type functionality that we're seeing now. So if you need to package things up as solutions and have solution deployment and environment variables and some of that stuff, then that would be a good use case for switching over to CDS or Dataflex Pro, whatever we're calling it now.
Yeah, some of these decisions for my customers, they start with the licensing aspect of what they currently have, what their customers are already using and accustomed to, and what kind of operational and maintenance costs will come after a system application goes live as well. So exactly what April said in terms of deciding those factors and then add on top of these decision-making factors as well. That's how I make these decisions for my customers, basically.
Yeah, another one I'll take into consideration too is the size of what that data source is going to grow to be, or what you think the life cycle is going to be. Obviously, with SharePoint, you can start hitting goofy things around 5,000 items in a list. And if you want to do a bunch of relational database type functionality, maybe SharePoint lists aren't the best place to go. Maybe you should look at CDS or Dataflex Pro at that point in time, or even look at something else, because you aren't tied to those two. You could use an Azure SQL database as well. Or I don't even remember all the data sources you can use, but you're not tied to just those three data sources either. And there may be some use cases for other data sources outside of those three.
And I actually did a very small test almost like a year and a half ago, where I loaded same set of 1,000 records in Azure SQL and SharePoint and created a Powerapps, a Canvas app, and try to find the load times, how fast what are out of these three are. But a year and a half ago, SharePoint list came out to be the fastest. I don't know what the situation is today, but that was the end result of that. I did not publish it because my testing methods were a little not realistic as well, because I was using demo tenants and I was working from India, and the data location for Microsoft sources was a little bit different in different geographical locations. So latencies do matter in these scenarios. So I probably want to do that kind of test as well and figure out which one today runs the fastest with Canvas and model driven apps as well,
Yeah, that's a good point. And kind of tied to that, so there was a question from Josh about the same time. What are your thoughts on using Azure SQL versus the Common Data Service for that data storage? Any other pros and cons that you would have between more so those two specifically?
I mean, I will say, I know like you were in that test, right, about comparing CDS and SharePoint and Azure SQL. CDS has gotten much faster, obviously, since a year and a half ago. It's something that they're constantly improving as far as performance and speed. As far as the Azure SQL versus CDS comparison, I think it really depends on who's going to be maintaining the data and what does it need to connect to and all of that. I mean, if you have your classic SQL DBAs, and those are the ones that need to maintain the data, and maybe they need data cubes and it's connecting to other services and stuff. Well, and Azure SQL is a great fit. If this is just really a Power Platform based application that maybe some citizen dev people are going to be maintaining, then the Common Data Service is a good fit for that because it's very intuitive from that citizen dev non-classic, DBA person.
Yeah, that sums it up well. I don't have anything else to add to that one. So next question, I don't know that anybody can answer this, but we'll give it a shot. When will Power Automate support assigning values to managed term set metadata columns? Currently, this is a joke because you have to hard code the GUIDs, which means you're using very poor coding practices. I have no idea.
I haven't seen it on the roadmap, so I'm assuming not anytime soon. But I will suggest that you go to the Power Users Forum, and if that's not already an idea, I bet it is. Look for that and vote it up because, obviously Microsoft does look at that and use that as a guide to determine which features to make a priority.
Yep.
And what I do to circumvent that is I create a configuration list where I put these and dynamically pick them up from the site. So if I have a dev, test, and a stage environment that I'm working with as well, it does. The Powerapp will dynamically pick it up to whatever site collection or the tenant I'm connected to for these GUIDs, basically. So that's a temporary workaround to get over that bad practice to hard code it within the application itself.
Nice. I had not thought of doing that. Next question is from Marie. Has there been a solution to converting Word docs in a SharePoint library to PDF files? Like as part of a drop-down list or an app that either saves it on the same library or a different library? This is a common action for documents that go through an approval publish cycle and would be convenient to a lot of companies. I've been working with a number of companies in this scenario.
I know there's third-party tools via Power Automate, or that I think you can add on like SPF extensions that will do that conversion. As far as out of the box, I know that the OneDrive connector has a, I don't know if you can with the Word actually. Probably I don't know if that it's there yet. So I know third-party tools that can solve that. Don't know if either of you have an out-of-the-box way that you handle it.
No, it's only the PDF conversion only works in OneDrive at this point. I think that's what the question is all about. And will it come to SharePoint document libraries? I don't know that either.
Yeah, I've used Muhimbi as a third-party tool to do conversions as part of Power Automate. I think they might add a drop-down to a SharePoint library. The other one that I personally use in my environment is I do have a subscription to the Adobe Creative Cloud. And if you have Adobe Creative Cloud, I think it's still PowerShell you have to go run to kind of connect your Adobe Creative Cloud to your SharePoint environment, which then opens PDF files in Adobe Creative Cloud, but also gives you some of those drop downs in terms of merging files into PDFs or creating PDFs. But it just gives you drop downs. It doesn't give you actions as a part of Power Automate. So it might depend a little bit on the use case there, Marie. Casey, can someone talk about their opinions of the related Microsoft certifications? I don't recall people really talking about the certs we can get. I don't. The only one I know of is the PL900 because that's the only one I've taken.
Yeah. There's a new one too that is in beta now. I feel like it's also, I want to say MB900, but I'll have to look it up to verify what it is. But it's a Power Platform Makers certification that's in beta right now. So that's kind of so the PL900 would be where to start because that's a fundamentals exam. So it covers, and I've taken that as well, the basics of each Power Platform tool. Just kind of, it's more of knowing which tool to use when. This new exam is more in-depth from an app maker standpoint. So you'll get more technical questions about, which function and Powerapps would you use for this and that, and goes kind of deeper into those scenarios. So those are the two ones. And then of course, on the Dynamics side, there are some Dynamics certs that have cross use for like Power Platform related stuff as well.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, April.
Sure.
Corey, we are migrating from on-premises Microsoft Suite installations to Office 365 and merging two tenants. What suggestions do you have for SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and other apps? Corey, I'll give you my phone number and you can call me, or you can go hire me with a micro job. Shameless self-promotion there. Look at some third-party tools is probably going to be my best bet there. There's a couple of them. I know ShareGate has some stuff with Teams to do migrations there, and that will let you do an Office 365 to Office 365 migration, because that's essentially what you're going to be doing when you're merging two tenants. That'll work for SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. When it comes to Powerapps and Power Automate,
Export,
maybe doing
import.
some exporting, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
There might be some other third-party tools. I don't think any of the Microsoft ones, like the Mover.io or the SharePoint migration tool, will let you do tenant to tenant. Metalogix and AvePoint are a couple other ones I would look at. Those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. ShareGate I've done it with, which is why I tend to mention them.
Yep.
Oh, this is the one you saw earlier, I think, Digit, is someone has a current 2010 workflow using impersonation. Is there something comparable in Power Automate?
Yeah, so what I do with that is you basically, so you have to understand how flow, or I still call it flow, how that flow runs basically in the context of the connection that you create. So what we do for our customers is, now it depends on the security compliance policies in your for your organizations as well, right? So in this case, we create app-specific service accounts that have a mailbox and SharePoint licenses, and then use those connectors in Flow to run as those users. And then those service accounts will have proper permissions in different places to impersonate as that service account, and that helps you, get that impression of getting an impersonation, but it works when that flow is triggered via an item created or an item updated. But just remember that if you still use flows to trigger them from Powerapps, that's when this kind of impersonation does not work. It will still run it in the user context. So I dump that data in a SharePoint list and then run it on an item created to make sure everything happens from that service account perspective. But it does have a additional licensing cost on top of it. So I hope that was clear enough.
Yeah, no, that works. So this is a follow-up question for April from one of the earlier ones. When you use that share link option in Power Automate to share a document from SharePoint, does that use the document ID link if the document ID is activated on the site collection?
I believe so, but someone please correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know. I have no idea.
I think it uses that immutable document ID. It doesn't matter if it's available or not, because right now there is another feature. If you even move a document from one place to the other and you use these shared links, they still work even if the document moves from one place to the other within the SharePoint ecosystem. Not if you delete and recreate a new document, but if you copy, move these documents, if you move those documents, then those IDs stay persistent out of the box. So again, somebody will have to do some hard tasks to make sure that that's the case there.
Yeah, that would be my guess as well, because it's going to use that same share link functionality. The next question from Chuck: can the steps in the Power Platform all be created with Json Strings under the hood? I don't know if he means Power Platform or Power Automate, because it differs a little bit, sort of. Can you do Power Automate with JSON Logic apps? So I do know you can export. If you export, edit the JSON and import, that works as long as you don't mess anything up, doesn't it? for
Yeah.
Power Automate.
Yep. Yeah, you can for Power Automate. You can't really do the same really for Powerapps. I mean, that's kind of a different beast. But for Power Automate, you technically could. Yeah.
Yep, because I've done that before when I've had to rearrange things that you can't always do in the UI. You can go manipulate the JSON. Just be very careful with it. From Kathleen, can Power Automate, maybe with Canvas, help with displaying HTML in a custom list view?
Not sure exactly what.
Yeah, can you, Kathleen, can you expand on that? And I don't know, is it Power Automate or Power Apps?
So what I'm guessing she's saying is, you might have like HTML in a SharePoint view, and maybe it's not displaying correctly. So I think the thing there that you want to look at is list formatting, because you can utilize list formatting to display information, say from an HTML field correctly. Because sometimes it'll show with like a div and all that
Yep.
HTML stuff in there instead of being formatted correctly. To me, that would be a good use case for list formatting.
Another one from Lisa. Lisa asked, when I attempt to create a Powerapp form via a SharePoint list or library, I always get the delegation warning, but I don't have anywhere near 500 records. Why am I getting it? How do I get rid of it? I also get errors stating that the data source supplied is invalid when I clicked on and used the custom forms link in the list or library. How can the data source be invalid when I'm using the tool as it was designed to be used? So kind of two questions. The first one is the delegation warning. When you are creating it from a list or library.
Yeah, so I can answer that. That will come regardless of whether you have 500 or one item in it, because what it is trying to tell you is you have to anticipate that if the number of items go large, there is a delegation obligation or the delegation limitations that apply within fetching data with the different data sources that apply to this particular piece of code that you've applied. So it's giving you a fair bit of warning that in large data sets, this condition might not work because it will only fetch by default 500 records unless you've gone back in the settings and moved it up to 2,000 limit that is allowed, basically.
Yep, and then an error stating that the data source supplied is invalid when clicked on and using the custom forms link in the list or library. Have either of you seen that?
I'll have to see to do that. I mean, I have to see what that code is or what that screen error looks like. Otherwise, I don't think I can answer that one.
Yeah, I was trying to think, could it be tied to columns? If you have certain columns, like a calculated field or something in your SharePoint list or library, could that create that error?
I think I've seen that happen when there's a limit on the amount of lookup fields that you can have in a SharePoint list that you're using as a data source. So I've actually seen that error when you reach that limit. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was. Like,
I think it's 13.
Say 10. Yeah, 10 to
32.
13, something like that.
32?
Or really? It's 32? Okay. Well, I know I've seen that error about the data source being invalid if you have reached that limit on lookup columns. So it could be something field related, like you're saying, specifically maybe the lookup.
Yeah, so that would be our guess, Lisa, on that second one is look at your fields or start with a smaller number of fields and maybe slowly start recreating it with all your fields. And it's probably has something to do with a field type that isn't supported or lookup fields. Bob asked, I would like to know about using the Power Platform for replacing expiring content workflows in SharePoint. Expiring content like date-based. I'm thinking a date-based column on content.
Yeah, it's kind of like a retention policy or something, like replacement, possibly.
Yeah. So did you have something, April?
Yeah, I was just going to say, again, a scheduled flow for that to go and monitor your list or library that you're wanting to check, and then get items matching the expiration date equals today, and then offloading those is kind of like an archive approach, assuming that's what you're asking.
Yep. I would agree with that one. Ganesh said, I think that's how you pronounce your name. Sorry if I butchered it. I also have a question regarding cascading. Can I do cascading columns or cascading fields for one of the document libraries using Powerapps, and then replicate that somehow across all the document libraries? So maybe like a document library template that has cascading work or cascading fields in Powerapps, and then replicating that over and over and over again. I'm not aware of a way to do it. I think you're going to have to rebuild the Powerapp with the cascading fields on every library.
Yep.
Yeah, or what we did for one of the customers was give them out-of-the-box document library web part, and created a connector filter web part on the right-hand side that connects them together and make it work from a filter perspective on a page, but not on the out-of-the-box document library. No. Well, custom code there with SPFX solution.
Got it. The next one from Nathan. In Powerapps, can you add a new child list item that is linked to the parent list item? So he says many list items, but I'm thinking just create a kind of a parent-child list item structure.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely something you can do using like galleries and repeating tables, so you can have your master record. I know there's tons of videos and on the power users community and stuff with people showing how to how to accomplish that.
Yep, you just have to come up with that business logic in Powerapps to tie those together in a way you want to.
Yeah, and I just confirmed from the documents, folks, it is 12, the lookup column limit. It's not 32, it's 12.
Okay, so we were between. So I said 10, Ben said 13, you said 32. It's somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in there. Oh, from Kathleen. I got to keep an eye on time because we have to pick a winner here in a minute. External views in SharePoint Online. Is there a way to increase the 2000 item limit like we can in SharePoint 2013? No, sorry, Kathleen.
Yep, pretty much.
Alec says, I'm in a migration scenario going from SharePoint 2013 to SharePoint Online. What is the best option to rebuild the workflows? Do you know if I can migrate all of them to using Flow on the cloud?
Yeah, no, I think we already kind of talked about that earlier.
Yeah, you should be able to. I would migrate it, rebuild them in Flow. I would avoid SharePoint workflows in the cloud.
Yeah.
What's the best way to create a test environment so that I can make sure my Powerapps don't break with whatever Microsoft changes? From Mel.
Whatever Microsoft changes, I'm not clear on that.
So Microsoft makes some change to Powerapps, whether it be a change in a control or retiring something or adding a new feature, or something that would introduce a breaking change to existing Powerapps, is kind of how I'm reading it. How do you create test apps within Powerapps so you can kind of have the whole dev prod scenario within Powerapps?
Well, I mean, I leverage environments for that. So usually, sometimes I'll have like a dev test and a prod environment itself, depending on like how you're wanting to do that. Or you can use a singular environment and make copies of your Power App. Kind of depends on how far out you want to go with it, right? But have a test copy of it. And I always do backups too. I always export my Power Apps just like as a default save, and save that to my the cloud somewhere, OneDrive or computer, so that if anything does happen like that, I have that physical zip file that I can always re-import.
Yeah, and one neat trick I can tell you that I use for making sure the connectors work across different lists as well is, let's say you have a dev Powerapp application, then you have a stage, and then you have a prod. And you can probably use PNP or ShareGit or any other tool to replicate 3 different site collections if you're using SharePoint as a backend, for example. So what I would do is, if by any reason they were architected in a way where the list names are different, if you have a list name, even in one site collection, which says employee underscore test, guess what? The connection that is created in Powerapps is created with the list title. So if you temporarily just change the title and remove and add that list in Powerapps, it will fit right back, and then you can go back in SharePoint and change the list title. So the connection names you can manipulate for, at least for SharePoint lists, that way if you need to do that import export thing and be there. But there is some additional advice from Microsoft on the CI/CD part of Powerapps. I don't know what that is all about. That might help in this multiple stage scenarios as well. You might want to look into that too.
All right. Perfect. So one last question while we look through some of them and pick a winner. It's a fun question for April. Those guitars rock. Tell us about them. Someone wants to know about your guitars in the background.
Yes.
And while we do that, we need to think about a question that wins the all access pass as well.
Cool. So yeah, so my guitar. So the black and white one is a signed Fender Strat, probably from a country singer that no one's ever heard of. And then the other one is my Ibanez Micro bass, the blue one. So I am in a rock band with my husband. He's the guitar player, I'm the bass and the keyboard player and the singer.
All right. Okay. Perfect. And April, I saw you post in the chat that question. Yeah. I like that one too. That was a good one. So we will go with Jamie. And she had the question, what's the one thing you wished you knew about the Power Platform, any of the products, when you first started using it? So Jamie, congratulations. You have won the All Access Pass. If you can, and Mark may already be putting this in the chat, get in touch with Mark. We do not have your email address or any contact info for you from your registration. So ping Mark, let him know the appropriate information so he can get you that all access pass. And again, he and Helen are probably madly typing away too in the chat to make sure you do that. But thank you, everybody. That wraps it up. Any last words of advice? We have like 2 minutes left. So anything else from you, April, Jajit, that you want to cover in the last couple minutes?
Not that I can think of. Just thanks for having me. Enjoyed being on, answering all the questions, and yeah, just if you build something cool, share it. I'm a big community person, so definitely blog about, if you can, what you've built, share it with the community, and always keep learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. Glad you could join us, and hopefully we'll see you for the next conference. And I think there's some more sessions coming up too. Anybody know what the next session is off the top of their head?
I can tell you.
Nope.
The next one is Migrating from Workflow 2010. What you need to know from David. So there you go. A lot of questions there. So go ahead and attend that one.
Yes, go check that one out, and we will see you all again soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.